Now, the reason this has an impact is because Vladimir Putin could be watching, and I've been skeptical that this is what Putin's going to do, but Vladimir Putin could be in a position where he basically says, Donald Trump's a weakling, now I'm going to start pushing him around. And that was exacerbated last night by an interview that Trump did with Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Now, the interview actually was done before Trump's walkback. So Trump's interview in time was before the walkback, but it is also more representative of his true views. This is one of the problems. I think Tucker's a deeply, deeply talented dude. I think that Sean Hannity is a really talented guy. I like both Tucker and I like Sean as well. But I do think that there's a tendency among a lot of folks to have Trump double down on his worst excesses. And Tucker really pushed him along that path in this interview. It is not good for the United States. It is not good for President Trump. If you want to see Trump be a successful president, you can't have him making these kind of overtures toward Russian aggression. And that's basically what he did last night. So Tucker went on last night and he started off his show by saying that this was basically a hostage tape, that Trump's walkback was a hostage tape. In the first place, he wishes that Trump had stuck with his original position, which is that the intelligence community is wrong and Vladimir Putin is right. I don't know why Tucker would say this. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Does he really believe that all 17 American intelligence agencies who all agree that Russia attempted to hack the DCCC, DNC, and Hillary Clinton campaign, all of them are lying? All of them are conspiratorial. All of them are wrong. But Vladimir Putin, who literally murders dissidents in his own country and interferes with elections all over the world, that guy is not lying to us. Here was Tucker saying that Trump was basically taken hostage by, I guess, the quote-unquote Republican establishment, another term that bothers me deeply. If you want to say establishment, you have to define establishment. Is Newt Gingrich the establishment? Because Newt was ripping on Trump over this. Was Laura Ingraham the establishment? Because Laura Ingraham was not happy with Trump over this. But here is Tucker basically ripping on the establishment and suggesting Trump should have gone along with Putin.
So that's the hostage tape. The president buckled to criticism. I don't know what they're saying. That's exactly what happened. He buckled. And that happens. This is politics, after all.
Okay, so the idea that this is a hostage tape, it's true that Trump didn't want to walk it back, but I'm not sure why him walking back a bad idea is a bad idea. It actually is quite a good idea. And then Tucker went on to suggest that Trump bowed to the intelligence community, and he said the intelligence community is trying to destroy democracy. Now, I have a lot of questions about the intel community. I have a lot of questions about Peter Strzok. I have a lot of questions about Lisa Page. I have a lot of questions about James Comey. Those questions have not been answered yet. We don't have the full Inspector General report on the Russian collusion investigation. But if the suggestion is that anything the intel community does is trying to destroy democracy because some members of the intel community are bad. So in other words, you don't like the Russian collusion probe, and therefore the Russian interference probe is bad. This is a logical fallacy. The intelligence community is fully capable of deriving the fact that the Russians were attempting to hack into the DCCC, the DNC, and the Hillary Clinton campaign without you having to accept the legitimacy of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. It's not like you either accept all or none. You can say what they are doing, trying to track down all of the bad action by the Russians in the election cycle. That stuff is fine. It's when they started targeting President Trump in overt fashion, when they started stretching the law in order to get Trump. That's the bad stuff. But Tucker apparently wants to wrap the whole thing up in a ball and then suggest that Trump bowed to the intel community and the intel community is trying to destroy democracy, as opposed to whom? Vladimir Putin, who hates democracy and has been in power since 2000, has been in power for nearly 20 years as a dictator in Russia. Here's Tucker.
Well, as the rage storm swirled, the president bowed to the inevitable, genuflecting before U.S. intelligence agencies whose judgment must never be questioned, and recited the now obligatory oath of loyalty to the spy bureaucrats now in charge of our country. This is about democracy, whether or not voters rule their country. It turns out the very people telling you they are saving our democracy are working overtime to destroy it and scolding you as they do.
Okay, that is such an overstatement. It's not the very same people working overtime to save our democracy. Those people are not Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Right? That is not those people. It's not James Comey. There are lots of people in the intel community working overtime to prevent Russian interference in our elections and many other bad things. And to watch this sort of blanket condemnation of the intel community, it's this sort of feel that is going to allow Putin, I think, to feel like he can interfere in our elections without a lot of blowback. Because if we think our enemies are the intel community, then I guess that he's not our enemy anymore. After all, he's the one being targeted unfairly by our intel community, apparently. Tucker's support of President Trump on his original Helsinki presser, I think, is deeply counterproductive for President Trump. And again, I respect Tucker. I think Tucker's a smart guy. But I think his perspective on this is skewed by the fact that Tucker tends toward isolationism on foreign policy. We're going to discuss President Trump and isolationism and NATO in just a second, because he got into it with Tucker on his show last night. President Trump is on with Tucker Carlson last night. And it wasn't just Tucker mouthing, I think, what were basically platitudes about the intel community trying to destroy democracy and how Trump was now being held hostage by the intel community. egged on by Tucker Carlson, Trump made some, I think, very ill-advised comments about NATO. Now, there are a lot of people who last week were worried about Trump and NATO. And I said, there's not really a reason to worry that much about Trump and NATO because Trump's going to say a lot of stuff, right? My theory about Trump has been pretty consistent here, which is Trump says a lot of stuff. Most people ignore most of that stuff. And then policy sort of gets done in the background. But there's one area where this is not true, and that is if the president of the United States signals weakness to foreign adversaries, and those foreign adversaries take those signals seriously and then get aggressive. We saw this happen with Crimea and Barack Obama. We saw this happen with Georgia and George W. Bush. We saw this happen with Saddam Hussein and George H.W. Bush. When an administration signals they're not going to do anything about aggression by a foreign adversary, foreign adversaries, foreign dictators, they start to get aggressive. Okay, this is not unique to any administration. It's true for every administration. Right? Trump has not been pushed yet. Usually what people say is that every new president is pushed with some sort of foreign crisis in the first couple of years. Trump has avoided that so far, but he is almost egging it on in some of these comments about NATO because, let's face this, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was put in place after World War II in order to check against Soviet aggression, that has been the key keeper of peace in the region for the last 70-odd years, for the last 73 years. That's been the key keeper of peace in the region. Remember, Europe was one of the most war-torn places on planet Earth for literally centuries. And then came NATO. Right? In the century before NATO, there were 2 world wars. There's a Franco-Prussian War. There were several Balkan wars. There are a bunch of different wars that were happening on the European continent in this time. Since NATO, there have been 0 major wars on the European continent, the only exception being Yugoslavia, where NATO actually took an active role in bombing. So the idea that NATO has been some sort of net negative for the United States or for world peace is just foolish. But here's what President Trump had to say about NATO. And this is troubling stuff because if you're Vladimir Putin, you're sitting back and you're hearing Trump say this, you might be saying to yourself, hey, maybe I ought to get aggressive. Here's what Trump had to say to Tucker Carlson.
NATO was created chiefly to prevent the Russians from invading Western Europe. I think you don't believe Western Europe's at risk of being invaded by Russia right now. So what is the purpose of NATO right now?
Well, that was the purpose.
But pause there for 1 second. First of all, the original creation of NATO, protect against Soviet interference in Western Europe, now applies to Russian interference in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe still matters, right? East Germany was a part of Soviet Russia. Just because the Soviet Union collapsed doesn't mean that we should allow Poland and Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and Albania and all these countries on the border of Russia to suddenly become Soviet client states again, Putin client states again. That's the actual answer here. Here's the answer Trump is going to give.
NATO right now.
Well, that was the purpose. And
right?
It's okay. It's fine. But they have to pay. And they weren't paying. And other presidents went and they'd make a speech and then they'd leave and nothing would happen. And, the fact that they didn't pay is not, new. It's not a new fact. This is something that people have known for a long time. Other countries were delinquent. In the real estate business, we use the word delinquent. They didn't pay. They didn't pay for past. So I went there 3-4 days ago and I said, folks, you got to pay. Because we're not going to pay from 70 to 90, and I think 90 is really the right, depending on the way you define it, 90%. We're not going to pay 90% of the cost to defend Europe. And on top of that, the European Union kills us on trade. We lost $151 billion last year on trade.
Okay, so what he has to say there is not actually accurate. The way that NATO works is that people have a pledge to spend a certain percentage of their GDP on defense. He is right that people should increase their defense spending, but it's not like they owe us money, okay? That's not how it works. It's not that they pay us and then we actually go out and defend them. The idea is they're supposed to keep a certain level of defense readiness. The worst part of this interview is what Trump actually said right after that. So Tucker Carlson asks him why his son should go die for Montenegro. Okay, and I don't think we actually have this clip. So so Tucker Carlson asks him, why should his son die for Montenegro? And here's what Trump says, quote, I understand what you're saying. I've asked the same question. Montenegro is a tiny country with very strong people. And by the way, they're very strong people. They're very aggressive people. And they may get aggressive. And congratulations, you're in World War III. But that's the way it was set up. Remember, I just got here a little over a year and a half ago, and I took over the conversation 3 or 4 days ago, and I said, you have to pay, you have to pay. It was very unfair. They weren't paying. So not only were we paying for most of it, but they weren't even paying, and we're protecting them. So add that to your little equation on Montenegro. Okay, so he's basically saying there's no reason why we should defend Montenegro. Right? He's saying that Tucker Carlson is right. Why should my son die for Montenegro? Now, I heard Tucker Carlson say the same thing to Max Boot in an interview about a year ago, and I thought that it was really an asinine point, this idea, why should my son die for Montenegro? Well, why should your son die for Poland? Why should your son die for Germany? Why should your son die for England? Why should your son die for New York? Why should your son die for anything, right? I mean, the whole point of having a military is that you are to defend your allies. No one is calling on Tucker Carlson's son to die, and nobody is calling on American soldiers to die. Every single foreign policy decision has to be made on the basis of whether we think that it is positive for the United States to intervene or whether it is negative. But one of the things that prevents us from having to intervene is a perception that we will if we have to. This is what Reaganism was all about. Reaganism was about the idea of mutually assured destruction and peace through strength. You're not going to cross that tripwire because if you do, we will mash you. You're not going to invade Montenegro because if you do, we'll kill you. And it's this notion that prevents us from actually having to expend soldiers in Montenegro. It is when the other side walks over the line that American soldiers die. It's in Vietnam, when the United States does not have a credible threat of retaliation, and then we gradually escalate that lots of American soldiers die. It's when that happens in Korea that American soldiers die. It's when that happens in the Gulf War that American soldiers die. It does not happen when there's a perception on the other side that if you cross us, we will break you, that we will absolutely shatter you. When that is the perception, then Vladimir Putin has no interest in crossing those borders. Beyond that, Trump's suggestion that Montenegro is aggressive with Russia is Russian propaganda. It's just nonsense. Montenegro is a tiny little country that has no aggressive instincts vis-a-vis Russia. In fact, it was the Russian government that in 2016 tried to assassinate, allegedly, the prime minister of Montenegro and replace him with a Russian proxy. So it's Russia that's aggressive toward Montenegro. I don't understand what Trump's deal with Montenegro is. I mean, that's kind of a weird one. And then Trump's suggestion, this is the worst thing of all, right? Trump's suggestion that mutual defense under NATO is a problem. The NATO charter has been invoked one time. One time. Okay, NATO charter has been invoked one time. What was that one time it was invoked? After we were attacked on September 11th. Montenegro currently has troops in Afghanistan because Montenegro came to the common defense of the United States after we were attacked on September 11th. So ripping on Montenegro and ripping on NATO is so foolhardy, and not only is it foolhardy, it sends a signal to Putin that you might be able to walk in. Now, maybe Putin doesn't take that seriously. Maybe Putin doesn't move forward with that. But if I'm an Eastern European ally, I'm going to have my doubts. I'm going to have some serious questions. Now, I said the same thing about Barack Obama. When Barack Obama pulled missile defense out of Poland, I said, this is a signal to Vladimir Putin he can get aggressive. And the Polish took it that way, too. And it created a rift in American-Polish relations. Well, the same thing could easily happen here with President Trump saying this sort of stuff. And it gets worse in a certain way. Trump was specifically asked about who is better, Angela Merkel or Vladimir Putin. Now, I'm not a fan of Angela Merkel. I think Angela Merkel has been a garbage prime chancellor of Germany. She's opened Germany's borders. She's helped subvert its welfare state. She's done an awful lot of bad in Germany. But if I have to choose Angela Merkel and a murderous dictator like Vladimir Putin, who literally went on national television a night ago and said that he kills people, but so what? Kennedy was killed in the United States. Now, I'm going to choose Angela Merkel every time over Vladimir Putin. And people who don't believe that, I think, don't know enough about Vladimir Putin. But here was Trump basically demurring on the question.
So I don't want to say who's better, who's not better, but I will say this. She's been very badly hurt by immigration. Very, very badly hurt.
So China.
I don't want to say who's better and who's not better. It's a pretty obvious question. Okay, I know who's better. You know who's better. Everyone knows who's better. This sort of signaling to Putin is really, it's bad stuff. It's just bad stuff. Okay, now that doesn't mean that Trump's activity vis-a-vis Russia has been weak in practice. But that's not the entire question. The question is also how much Russia is going to take away from this, that Trump is a pushover and somehow they can push him around. I don't want Trump to be this. I want Trump to be stronger. I want Trump to succeed. I want him to be a successful president. I want every president to be successful in defending the United States and our allies. And when President Trump signals weakness out of a sort of Pat Buchanan-esque isolationism, I think that it is a deep mistake. I think it's a serious mistake for the president, and it's not helping him in any serious way.